Discovering Asian dramas back in 2018 was an enlightening moment for me, and I've never looked back. I enjoy talking about them just as much as watching them, so much so that I decided to create a podcast with a heavier focus on Chinese dramas, but passing through Korean, Japanese, Thai, and Filipino dramas. Welcome to the Tea and Soju Asian Drama Podcast, your corner for drama talking. For more tea and soju content, consider joining Patreon, where I release extra reviews and polls. Everything is linked in the episode description. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Tea and Soju Asian Drama Podcast. I'm your host, Liliana, and in today's episode, we've got another guest series. And it's a very special one because I have not one, but two guests, and they're going to be teaching me something because we're going to be talking about Chinese historical dramas. They also have a podcast, and I'm going to let them introduce that and introduce themselves. So, Cathy, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Very excited to be here on this podcast. This is Cathy. I am a co-host of the Chasing Dramas podcast series. Karen, I'll turn it over to you.
Hi, I am the other co-host for Chasing Dramas. My name is Karen, and Chasing Dramas is a podcast that originally started to discuss Chinese culture and history through historical Chinese dramas, but we have recently expanded to be more up-to-date and provide up-to-date information on Chinese dramas as they air, and also keep you in the know on Chinese entertainment news.
That's true. I do really like your bite-size in the know episodes because again, we were just discussing this offline. I don't follow like the entertainment business that much in, China. I love the dramas, but I tend to stay away a little bit from all of that. But it's really good to just go in and listen to like those bite-size episodes that you guys put out. And then I was like, oh, now I know. Now like I'm in the know and I don't have to do like all the searching, which I'm sure you guys, it must take quite a bit of work to do that aspect of it.
It's all right. I think a lot of people, it's just easier because we can read and write Chinese. So it's easy to kind of just follow that. But certainly it's probably not healthy, the amount of Weibo scrolling and, online scrolling that we're doing to keep up to date on all the developments.
I have tried, I will say, I have tried Weibo. Like they had like the international app, but I was like, I can't do this. Like it's so like the international app just isn't great. Their translations weren't too bad, I will say. Like they weren't just understandable. Like I could get the gist and swap a couple of words in and out. But the app itself, I was like, and it's not like, I think it's one of those apps that it isn't, unless you really understand the Chinese version of it, then it's not that worth it. I follow like Twitter accounts that post everything like from Weibo but into Twitter, and they'll post it in English. So that's like as far as I go into that side of it. So we've got some questions. We'll go into those, and I'm really excited. The first one I've got down is, how did you come to watch Chinese historical dramas or Chinese dramas in general? Like, how did you guys come into this world of, Chinese entertainment?
Yeah, so I'll take this question actually. So our parents, we're sisters. Our parents would watch those particular historical Chinese dramas growing up. And in the States, we would watch along with them. And this was a way really just to understand my family's culture and history as well. So at the time, they would be buying, VHSs, then it was VCDs, then DVDs, and then now it's, of course, streaming. But I remember sitting in the living room with the whole family watching with my family. And then the most that were popular at the time, thinking, in the late 90s, it would be Pearl Princess or else the wuxia dramas such as The Legend of the Condor Heroes. We wanted to learn more, and these were all very much historical fiction, but they were based off of, for example, the Qing dynasty, or for example, the Song dynasty or Yuan dynasty. So they were based in history, and we would always say, oh my goodness, I want to learn more. And for a lot of these, they would have books in addition to the actual the dramas, or actually these dramas would be based off of these books. So that's how kind of we started to learn from the dramas and then dove in a little bit deeper with the books themselves.
Was it something, do you guys, this is not a question, but I hope it's not too bad or too hard of a question.
Yeah.
Like, was it easy for your parents to get hold of those like tapes and stuff back, in the day? Or was it something that, maybe was quite hard to get hold of back then?
So I can take this. I think it was certainly like you had to go to China to
Yeah.
buy those DVDs or VCDs. And there were certain, I remember growing up in the States, there were certain Chinese stores that stocked them. So, you just got to go see what's available. But I certainly remember having to ask my aunts and uncles to be like, I want to see this drama. Do you think you can buy the DVDs? And, they would bring them over whenever like family members would come visit, or if my parents would go to China. And so that's pretty much how we got our fill of Chinese dramas.
See, I feel like this is like so interesting because to me, I've always known, the streaming media because that's how I've always watched dramas. I started watching Chinese dramas back in 2018. So by then, like pretty much all the platforms were pretty well established. So it's so interesting to me to get like that perspective because it must have been, a lot harder. Well, obviously, if you guys had to get it like from China itself, it must have been a lot harder. But it must have been it must be quite nice now to have it way more readily available for you guys to like watch. And also, do you guys watch it with English subtitles or do you not need them at all? Yeah, I didn't think you would.
Yeah, we're shaking our heads.
Yeah, they are shaking their heads. So, because for me, I do want to try. I've started to like learn Mandarin. I feel way intimidated because like I'm bilingual as well. Like I was born in Portugal but moved to the UK when I was young, and learning English to me was very, very simple because I feel like English is a pretty simple language. But when it came to like learning and like even trying French out or Spanish, any of like the languages that are like near Portugal, they're pretty simple for me to grasp. Obviously, when you go into Asia, whole different ball game, like whole different, obviously, language and whatnot. So I do want to learn Mandarin because there's dramas, like especially if it's in Mango TV drama, their subs are horrendous and I just cannot. Like some people can watch it. I have friends who will watch it with those subs and they can grasp everything and I'm like I don't understand. Like you're having to do
Funny.
puzzle words here to like get it. So yeah, I've always said my one superpower that I would love to have is to just be able to understand and speak all languages fluently because it's I feel like that's a God-given gift that is. So next up, what prompted you to start a podcast about like Chinese dramas specifically?
Yeah, to be honest, it was just a passion project where we thought, hey, we have the ability to speak, read, and write in Mandarin and speak English fluently. And I think that really is the unique proposition that we have here. Even growing up in the States, I feel like there are learning Chinese has been challenging because you're trying to immerse yourself in the American culture. But we just loved Chinese dramas. We love Chinese history and culture from the Chinese dramas. And so we thought, why not talk about them? We also do have to give thanks to our ability of reading, writing, and speaking Chinese to these Chinese dramas. People are always asking my parents, like, how did your daughters learn to speak, Chinese so well or read Chinese? And for them, they're like, they just watched a lot of Chinese TV.
I love that. I love that. I really, really love the fact that, do you think if you guys hadn't gotten interested in like Chinese dramas that you wouldn't have picked up like, Mandarin, or do you guys speak Mandarin? Is it Mandarin that you both speak?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. I would say we are probably some of the most immersed in Chinese culture people that you will meet. Like if you've listened to our podcast, like I play the Chinese zither, we've done Chinese martial arts, like I play bamboo flute, we do calligraphy, like a lot of things that are very like Chinese culture oriented. And a huge part of that is just because, God, we saw this on TV, like this is so cool, let's try it out. And I think that's like something hopefully we are inspiring people to do, because learning Chinese can be fun. And actually, I feel like growing up, people may have been intimidated by learning Chinese, but as you just said, learning Mandarin can be fun by watching these Chinese dramas, because there's so much available, whether it is history or culture or just having fun watching the dramas. I think it's a way to make this not a homework project, but something that can be very entertaining as well.
I really love the fact that you guys, like, in a way, through Chinese dramas, you kind of like they brought you more into, in touch with that part of your culture. And I think it's always so important to like stay, whether, immigrants in general, it's always really hard, I find, to stay in tune with like your culture. And I always find that it's so my mum, when I was very young, obviously moved to the UK, my mum would always say, like, you're at home, you need to speak Portuguese, because otherwise you're gonna lose it, and I don't want you to do that. And I used to hate it when she was when I was young. I used to absolutely hate it that she would make me speak Portuguese. But now, like, as a fully grown adult, I'm so glad that she did, because it's like I would have hated to not be able to connect with like that part of the culture. And like, I also mentioning about your podcast, this is why I love listening to your guys' episodes, because I feel like there's lots of Korean drama podcasts out there, because there just is. And I feel like there's not a lot of like Chinese ones, but I love the fact that you guys do have that like in-depth and insight to be able to explain things in a way that I wouldn't be able to understand. Like, I can review dramas, I can talk about what I love, but I can't go into like those areas because I don't have that background. So I love listening to your podcast and like getting that insight from it. So you guys do a wonderful job, you really do.
Oh, thank you. We really appreciate that.
Next up, I wrote this question, but I feel like this is an easy one to answer because I feel like you're both. So, how well versed do you consider yourselves to be in Chinese historical dramas specifically?
So I wouldn't say we are, 100% well versed, because we won't say we watched everything, because we did grow up in the US, so there is some divide. We did watch our own, the American shows, like loved Parks and Rec, all of that type of stuff. So we would have our Chinese dramas, and then our American dramas, or even the British dramas that we watch. But I think we really did keep up with the major shows and kept up with the times, especially since family time was really watching TV. Like, we wanted to talk about, what happened in the Han Dynasty. Then we would say, let's watch the show and then talk to our parents about it, or else I'll read a book about it. After internet and streaming became, everybody became more and more connected, we then started seeing what other people in China were watching, and that's how we also kept up. And Karen and I really joke that we actually watched like the most popular Chinese historical dramas pretty much over the past 25 years, because that's what folks in China are reminiscing of them growing up. So thinking about our favorite actors and actresses over the past couple of years or past decades, they seem to be the same ones that most everybody in China knows about as well. So having that background and really keeping up with the times, we wouldn't say we have seen every single show, but we have covered quite a bit.
Yeah, I was thinking about this the other day as well. It's the fact that I always feel like what is popular in China is very different to what's popular like internationally in terms of like Chinese dramas in general. So that's also something I quite appreciate about listening to your podcast, is the fact that you can go in and you guys will have like that insight from what's happening in China, like what's big in China, and not necessarily like internationally, because I feel like what does well in China doesn't necessarily does well all the time. I mean, not all the time, but a lot of the time, like, something that is, because I feel like they like historical dramas over there, but they don't do quite as well internationally, I don't think. And I feel like some of that may be because, as an international fan, because you don't know the history, you can kind of like almost get lost in it, and not understand like the significance of what they're trying to tell you. And Yeah, I feel like, listening to your guys' perspective on it is quite good to like get those extra meanings. That's what I'm trying to get at. So,
Yeah, and actually, I think that's the whole point of the like why we started our podcast is because of so many of these nuances of these super popular historical Chinese dramas that we loved in terms of creating an interest in Chinese history that we absolutely knew that American or Western audiences would have no idea what they meant. And so we were like, we have the ability to explain this. It is a passion of ours. We enjoy it. So why not spend the time to talk about it?
Yeah, I think like one of the ones of the dramas that comes to mind to me very easily, it's not necessarily it's his period set, but it's the drama Word of Honor. They use a lot of poetry in that drama, and until I went and looked it up, it like everything went over my head, and I was like, after I looked it up, I was like, oh my God, there's so much more hidden in what they're saying and what they're doing than I could ever grasp without somebody, that knows what they're talking about, like explaining it to me. So I am so appreciative to people who do know, like to take their time and like explaining it, because I feel like we can get so much more out of the dramas that way. So yeah, that one was a big one that I was like, I need to go and find out what's happening. So, our next question, what makes historical Chinese drama stand out, do you think?
Sure. So I think there are a few different types of historical dramas, and you actually touched on it, where there's one is that there are the actual historical dramas that is engaging, but also steeped in history and culture. They are the ones that make you like the characters, the story, but also the world that it reflects. I particularly enjoy the dramas that make you reflect on the time period and also makes me go do research and go down a rabbit hole, whether it's Baike or Wikipedia, and then go on to, whether it's primary sources or whatnot to learn more about the history. That is why Empresses in the Palace or Zhen Huan Zhuan and the story of Minglan, Zhifou, Yingshi Liu Fei Hongshou stand out so much in China. Those two are probably one of the, some of the most popular historical Chinese dramas in China and also gaining a lot of popularity in the States. The other kind of historical drama is what you said, those period pieces that is, people are dressed up in historical, outfits, but it's not set in a real historical time period. There are these dramas that stand out where they are able to create an extremely immersive world with their own customs or kingdoms and cultures that you could really believe in and enjoy. So the types of dramas that would fit this bill are Joy of Life. It came out in 2019, or Qing Yunian. And then also the very popular classic now is Nirvana and Fire, Lang Yabang. Both of them are not based on history per se, but they do include a lot of historical components. They reference poems and, prose from various masters, and also just the culture and world building that is created in those dramas are fantastic. So those are, the types of dramas that are also highly entertaining. Not necessarily historical, but I guess they have those historical components.
You've touched on 3 dramas that are on my to watch list. They are Joy of Life, but I hear there's a second season, and I keep thinking I just want to push it out until like it's closer to that second season, since I haven't watched it yet. But that is definitely on my to watch list. Minglan, I've heard so many good things about this drama that I definitely want to watch it. And Nirvana and Fire is also like in my to watch. So those 3 are like highly up there. I've heard many good things. I've heard that like the story building of it are very, they're very, very well written dramas. So I'm quite interested to go in. I feel like I need to do one at a time, like watch one and then do like, slowly. I feel like it's going to be a project of mine to make it through one of those.
So my recommendation for those is Joy of Life and Nirvana and Fire are more easily digestible.
Yeah.
And because it's not like set in history, they're much more easily, like viewable. The story of Minglan, we did do a podcast series about it. It's highly entertaining. There are some points that are just like, it's just funny and like a easy watch, but there is a lot of history in it that you may not really understand if you're just coming at it just, blind.
Minglan, I've got a friend of mine who loved it, absolutely loved it, and she actually did go and like dig into the history afterwards because she was just so curious about everything that they were talking about. And I feel like if a drama can do that, if it can make you curious enough to go and look at like, to learn more, then I feel like a historical has done its job, in a sense, because it's made you curious enough. And I feel, that's one of the good things. So next up, what are some of the weaknesses and strong suits of Chinese historical dramas, do you think?
So I'll start off with the weaknesses. And one of the main ones right now, I believe, is really the screenwriting. It's very rare right now to get a drama that is as engaging as, let's say, Empresses in the Palace or The Story of Minglan. There's a reason why there's probably a handful that you can pick from the past decade. Oftentimes, screenwriters just adapt a source material rather poorly and then call it a day. They hope that the strength of the original IP will draw viewers, but then they make a little effort to really like translate the source material to the screen. I also think that the script will be much more mellow with regards to people's motivations or even scandals and plots. And I see that a lot in book adaptations. Also right now, I think there's only like a 40 episode limit. So they need to squeeze a lot in, or there's just some topics that can be covered in books that can't really be translated on screen. So that's why a lot of times, you might have these beautiful and gorgeous period dramas or, historical fiction dramas that just don't really capture the eye because the screenwriting is rather poor. Now, the strength, though, is luckily for Chinese history, there's a treasure trove of history to choose from. So, with over, 2,500 years of history and written history to pick from, there's always so many topics with which a drama can choose to focus on. So, for example, we're going to go back to the story of Minglan. This was set in the Song dynasty and focused on a particular household. For example, like if you're the daughter, not from a main wife, how does she navigate her life? But then right at around the same time period, you have Qingping Yue, which is Serenade of Peaceful Joy, which then focused on the same time period with the emperor. So you can have so many various facets of the just same 10, 20-year time period over the course of 2,500 years of history that you can pick from. It's just, again, that screenwriting really needs to match the history that you're given to play with. Not play with, but really to draw from.
Yeah, I feel like I've always said, and I feel like what you've touched on for the strong suit is something that is not just for historical dramas, it's like for Chinese dramas in general. When it comes to like, we were talking about like fantasy. I'm a fantasy lover. There's so much in like Chinese mythology and culture and whatnot that they can pick at to, make these dramas that will be so uniquely Chinese. Like you won't get them anywhere else. And the history is like so vast and there's so much of it that you can pick from a lot of history to go with. So yeah, that's definitely one of the strong suits for it. So next up, what are the main dynasties used in Chinese historical dramas? So what I mean by that is there's which dynasties do you think are the ones that keep coming up over and over again, and just like if you guys have like any mini brief description about them, that would be great, because I feel like there's one or two that I tend to see a lot more, but I'd be interested to see what you guys say.
Sure. So these things actually come in waves. The Qing Dynasty dramas were very, very popular up until just a few years ago. And this can be a whole separate topic on Chinese entertainment censorship of like what you are allowed to show or film and produce on screen. But up until the last couple of years, Qing Dynasty dramas were very popular because one, there's are a lot of stories to tell, and we have the historical references available just because the Qing dynasty was much more recent in terms of history. So we have historical documents or relics to look through. If we think about the most popular historical dramas, these include Empresses in the Palace, the story of Yanxi Palace or 宫锁心玉, and then there's Startling with Each Step, which is 步步惊心, and then also Pearl Princess, 还珠格格, all of them set during the Qing dynasty. And growing up, there were plenty of other Qing dynasty dramas that caught eyeballs. It helps because many of the emperors during the Qing dynasty had fascinating lives, as well as the people around them. So if you think about Emperor Shunzhi with his tragic love story with Dong Efei, Emperor Kangxi with his fight with Aobai and his love life. You know, we have Emperor Yongzheng fighting his brothers for the throne, Emperor Qianlong with so many possible stories to tell because of how long he lived and various conquests in his life. That is why I would say, you know, my hunch is why there are so many dramas set in the Qing dynasty. Now, if we take a step back, there are I would say the other popular dynasties to look at are the Tang dynasty and then also the Han dynasties, because there are powerful leaders that helped translate intriguing stories then on screen. So for example, the Tang dynasty, which existed over 1,000 years ago and is most likely the dynasty that we will be exploring next in our series. We have that dynasty that started with an epic downfall of the Sui dynasty. And then you had Emperor Li Shimin's brutal murder of his brothers at Xuanwu Gate to secure the throne. And then his subsequent liaison with the famous Wu Zetian, who then married his son and allowed her to become the only female emperor in Chinese history. So every dynasty certainly has a few dramas here and there, but I would say in broad strokes, looking at historical Chinese dramas as a whole, the Qing dynasty, Tang dynasty, and Han dynasties are perhaps the most popular, or you could say bloated in terms of content.
Yeah, I think the one that I've watched most out is probably the Qing dynasty. That is the one that I tend to, you know, the one that I tend to, or that I've watched most of, you know, in terms of Chinese historical dramas. But I am interested to like watch more out of that. There is, and I don't know which one this is. You guys are going to have to try and tell me, because it's the one, and I'm probably going to sound really rude. I'm not trying to, but it's the one dynasty where men tend to have the front of their head shaved and then like the back into a braid. Which dynasty is that one? Do you guys know?
Yes, so that is actually the Qing dynasty. So that is the last Chinese dynasty. And the reason why Karen was saying it's the most recent is because the dynasty fell only in 1912. So that's pretty recent. Yeah, pretty recent. You know, when we talked to my grandparents or, you know, my great grandparents, they would remember, for example, what their family was like when, you know, their fathers or grandfathers still had those braids, you know, back in the 20th century, early 20th century.
That is crazy. I did not know that it was that recent. Like, I knew it was, you know, it had fallen recently, but I didn't know it was like that recent in terms of, you know, the timeline. That's really, really interesting, actually.
And so if you go to Beijing right now, there are still plenty of courtyards that have, you know, houses and, you know, decorations from the Qing dynasty. You know, we did talk about this in some of our podcast episodes about foot binding, which was a culture or custom in the Qing dynasty. And for example, my great grandmother had her foot bound when she was growing up. And so it's not as far as people think it is, even though in the last 150 years in, you know, history, so much has changed, and modern day China looks so different from the Qing dynasty. And that's a whole nother topic of, you know, Chinese history that we can get into. But that, I think that's why the Qing dynasty is so, you know, so popular, because like I mentioned, it started in the 15th, 16th century, and then all the way up until 1912. And there's just so much content that we have actual historical records for. Whereas the Han dynasty, is 2,000 years ago. The Tang Dynasty is 1,000 years ago. And then for a lot of the other dynasties, you know, you could say the Song Dynasty, it's beautiful, but guess what? It ended up in, you know, the Mongolians coming in and taking over. So it's not the best story to tell. Same thing with maybe the Ming Dynasty. So I think you want to showcase like a winning side. And so you have to be very careful in terms of which historical time period you pick, because that can be a delicate matter.
Yeah, like you mentioned, censorship is quite a thing in Chinese dramas, isn't it? I have wanted to do a episode on like censorship, because a lot of people don't know. Like if they're just going blind into Chinese dramas, they have no idea that, like, you know, censorship is a thing, because it's something that perhaps, you know, in their dramas they haven't had to dealt with. And I remember when I first started watching, I was like, stuff would happen and you'd be like, why is that? Like, why is that? The story doesn't warrant that. Like, why is it going that way, or something like that? And it was really interesting to start reading up on, you know, censorship and what it entails. And I can definitely see like them not, you know, but that's with any country. You wouldn't want to show like your bad side or your losing side. Like you'd want to put your best foot forward, and like dramas and entertainment is a way to do that within any country. It's not just Asia, it's like, you know, West or whatever. It's completely a form of soft power that any country will use. So yeah, that's really interesting. I had no idea that it was like that recent. I'm a little bit shocked that, you know, I didn't know it was quite that recent. So, next question up. What dynasty do you individually tend to gravitate towards, or do you prefer out of, you know, everything that you've watched?
So if I could choose, I personally think that the Tang Dynasty is so fascinating, because we have in that time period, like I mentioned, the only female emperor in all of Chinese history. And in the Tang Dynasty, you also see a rise in women in power, and they have their own fascinating stories where Chinese history is generally, you know, a patriarchy. And so the fact that during the Tang Dynasty, you had such powerful women is such a unique, I guess, space to explore. And plenty of the dramas that do showcase that time period try to showcase a more powerful and successful kind of like side of women that I think is very unique. And plus, like when you think about the vastness of the Tang Dynasty, so this was about 1,000 years ago. The Tang Dynasty, which you will see if you watch The Longest Day in Chang'an, which is the drama that we will talk about next for our podcast series, it is so diverse. They had in Chang'an tons and tons of merchants from all over the world. And that was such a unique place for people to come together. And it was probably like the center of the world at that point. We think about how, you know, connected our world is now, but if we look back in the Tang Dynasty 1,000 years ago, it was the place to be. And so telling various stories up from the poets that we have, like, for example, Li Bai is one of the most famous poets. He lived during the Tang Dynasty, and his interactions with the royal and imperial family during that time is interesting. You have all of these other writers, singers, etc. It was such a beautiful and lavish place to live that, you know, we do get to see that on screen. And it's just such a interesting place to continue to learn more about.
You guys are saying that's your next, you know, pod review. I feel like that might be a good way for me to watch it, along with you guys, if that makes sense, like as you know, review the episodes. So I might have to, you know, do that and schedule that in. But also you were saying about the empress, the only empress. Do you know if there's any dramas or anything that was done based on her story at all?
Plenty. So her story is one of the most popular, and it has made the careers of she is an older woman now, Liu Xiaoqing, because she played the empress. And then actually the now censored Fan Bingbing did have a drama about Wu Zetian, or the Empress.
Mhm.
So she pops up in so many dramas as of late. For example, actually in Feng Qi Luoyang, or Luoyang, which is a drama that came out last year, they portrayed her. So she is always out and about. Like, people love to talk about her, or if not, show her on screen, talk about her impact. So
Yeah.
certainly it's like, she is a mythical character in Chinese historical dramas.
See, I feel like I'd be really, really interested in watching something that is like surrounded, like based on her story. I feel like that would be so different to anything I've watched because, it's a woman that has the power and, that's so, like you said, Chinese, history has been very much patriarchal. So it'd be really, really interesting. You guys will have to let me know, like, which one I should watch because I feel like I would love to watch something that's like based on her story. I just feel like it'd be really interesting. So Cathy, what do you about like which dynasty do you think you gravitate towards?
Sure. So for me, I mean, Karen took the Tang Dynasty. I love that too. I'll make a quick plug. If you want to learn more about that female emperor, you'll be in for a treat because there's quite a bit of a scandal in there as well. But I would actually take the Han Dynasty, which is this dynasty was started in around 200 BC. There was a small blip in around the turn of the millennia, and then it ended around officially in 200 AD, and then went straight into like the Three Kingdoms period. I personally really like the Han Dynasty because it really set the context and was really the culture for a lot of Chinese culture now today. So in China, the majority of folks identify the ethnicity would be Han Chinese, and they take that from the Han Dynasty over 2,000 years ago. With it, there are some very interesting emperors. You have Emperor Han Wudi, who in the early years of his reign was a very great emperor, wanted to expand the empire, but then his life turns very tragic late in life where he, kind of became old and senile. And you can read it on history, but he basically killed his own son, the crown prince, because he wanted to, and he believed in these, courtiers and wanted to become or ate a bunch of pills to live forever, that type of scenario. And that is just really, really juicy and really interesting as well. There are some pretty good historical dramas that have come out around the Han Dynasty, but that is one as well that really just catches my eye, both from a reading perspective and also from a drama perspective.
See, you guys are just with that you mentioned about the juicy bits about the Empress. I feel like this is just talking to me in terms I feel like I need to go and watch something with her, and I don't know, I just feel like it'll be a very, very interesting watch. But also with you mentioning about the Emperor, I feel like having these stories where these people in power go a little bit, crazy, it kind of deems for a really, really good drama in a sense. So, I feel like, again, that's one of the strong suits for Chinese dramas. It's because you have this, vast, and I feel like it's pretty well documented in terms of like Chinese history. Feels like there's a lot documentation that you can kind of refer back to, at least from, what I've kind of gathered. Not every culture has that, not every country has that, but it's definitely a plus, not only because you learn, years and years of, history, but also, when it comes to dramas, you have a lot of documentation to be able to do something that's true to the story in a sense. So yeah. Right, and next up, do you guys watch any other genre of Chinese dramas other than historical? And if so, which ones are some within, another genre that you guys enjoy watching?
Yeah, so the main one, we have a couple, but the main one probably will be the wuxia or martial arts genre. So in the late 1990s and early 2000s, that was the time of what you would call the heyday of wuxia dramas. Generally, the drama adaptations would be of wuxia or martial arts books by Jin Yong or Gulong or other novelists. And they were, how we really, really got interested into Chinese dramas, culture, and history, because we would honestly obsessed over these dramas. And then we'd go find the book, and then we would also reference them to say, hey, does this match what's showing up in the drama itself? Luckily, our dad had copies of these books growing up, so we would always reference them. But those dramas definitely helped us learn to read, write, and speak Chinese. So these dramas, as we mentioned earlier, oftentimes were tied to historical events. So dramas such as Legend of the Condor Hero or 射雕英雄传, and there was a couple of versions that have come out in the past several years, but that particular drama was set during the fall of the Song Dynasty and the establishment of the Yuan Dynasty. So think like 12th century AD. So many of those side characters and those stories are actual historical figures. So then those would be the first real introduction for us into an interest in like Chinese history. But also, for those dramas, you watch everybody flying around. If you think, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, how beautiful that was, why wouldn't you want to learn how to be a martial artist as well?
That's really, really interesting, actually. So I had a guest on a couple of weeks back, and she's from Hong Kong, but she lives in the UK, and she says she also talked about wuxia and like how she grew up watching, a lot of wuxia, and how actually I'll be interested to get your guys' opinion. This is not a question, but like, what do you think? Because I hear from people who grew up watching wuxia in like the 90s and early 2000s, they say that like wuxia now first isn't like true wuxia because it's the fighting style isn't what it's supposed to be, but also that it's like it's nowhere near as good. So what do you guys think about that in terms of like a comment?
Yeah, so that's the general view now, that the quality of martial arts dramas now is nowhere near as good as it was back in the day, because 2 decades ago, people would be like, the casting and the director would focus on casting characters that would match the book characters. And they required them to learn martial arts, to ride horses, all of that jazz. Nowadays, it does seem that a lot of production companies are just like, we want to churn out these shows as quickly as possible. They don't force a lot of their actors or actresses to learn some of these skills, martial arts skills and whatnot. And so nowadays, it's been such a huge kind of rarity to see an actor actually learn or know how to ride a horse. And when he or she does, everyone's like, oh my God, that's like such a big deal. And not even mind like the martial arts fighting. So Wu Lei, for example, who was in Love Like the Galaxy, I don't know if you're familiar, like he knows how to ride horses, and everyone just like loves when he's on horseback, because so many other people are not able to do that anymore. And if you really do look at the martial arts choreography now versus 20 years ago, it's certainly, I mean, they had, stunt doubles and whatever, but most people still were able to have like the composure and posture and had basic training for martial arts. And it's just very different now, because a lot of the youngsters don't have that type of training anymore. And so that's why there's been a focus on, like these fantasy dramas. You could say that fantasy dramas are easier because it's just CGI, green screen everywhere. They don't have to actually know how to do martial arts, just pose some cool, poses, and that's it. That's where, we feel really saddened as really big wuxia fans that we don't get to see such amazing martial arts anymore.
I will like to add too, like 20 years ago, that's where we had the biggest like martial arts stars. Well, you can't beat Bruce Lee, but that's where you had Jackie Chan, Jet Li, and then also in Hong Kong entertainment, you had, for example, Donnie Yen, and then of course our latest Best Actress winner, Michelle Yeoh. She was all doing the actual martial arts stunts herself in, for example, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, or in a bunch of martial arts Hong Kong movies. So back then, they would actually be there fighting. They would actually be doing a lot of the stunt choreography themselves. We just don't get that type of acting today.
Yeah, I'm hopeful that, you know, I don't know. I feel like so last year there was a big thing about like iQIYI specifically cutting down a bunch of their dramas and, you know, stuff and whatnot, and like kind of like reinventing their, you know, overall idea. And I'm hopeful that they're moving towards, I'm always hopeful of this, that Chinese drama land is like moving forwards with like quality over quantity, which they haven't been. I feel like they've always been, they want to churn those dramas out. You know, the more dramas they get out, the more money they get. And, you know, it doesn't necessarily have to be, like you were saying, it doesn't necessarily have to be that the actor is good for that role. It's that that's a high traffic actor and they'll bring the numbers in. So I'm hopeful that we're moving in like in a direction where they will do like they will think quality over quantity. Um but you know, you just never know. But I am not like, I haven't watched a lot of Wuxia, but I have tried to like find some of the older ones to watch and they're just not available anywhere, which is like a little bit sad. And this is what I mean. I just need to learn Mandarin so I can just, you know, be able to not need subs. But that is like the overall thing that I hear from like Wuxia fans is like, you know, back in the day it's had its heyday, but I'm hoping it'll have its like height again, hopefully. With Wulei, you were saying, I did watch last year, I think Love Like the Galaxy was my first drama of his that I watched, and then I just watched Nothing But You as well with him, which is like modern. And I was like, I then went and watched other stuff that he was in, and I was like, I can't believe he's like a child actor. He's like acted in so much, and I can see the difference in like, you know, him, just like you were saying, him riding a horse. It like it looks more natural that, you know, he's riding a horse on screen, and it definitely makes a difference when an actor can, you know, just do a lot more work than whatnot. And actually, that just gave me a little, you know, inkling of a question, because I feel like this is a really good question for you guys. So with let's just, you know, dip a little bit into this dubbing. Does it make a difference to you guys when it's dubbed and when it isn't? Because for me, as like international audience, I can pick up, I've started to be able, I've watched enough Chinese dramas to be able to pick up certain things. But with you guys, like, you know, the tone difference, or especially like in historical dramas, you might be able to tell that that's not quite from that period, and that would bring you out of the story, if that makes sense. So what is like just your overall thoughts on it?
So I'll put it this way, just historically, one of the main reasons, or two of the main reasons why most Chinese dramas or period dramas or historical dramas were dubbed is because, one, wherever they're filming, they couldn't really do the noise capture very well. So then if there was a lot of background noise, it's just easier to dub over. And two, the other is actually the fact that many actors or actresses don't speak what you would call proper Mandarin. So for example, if you have a Cantonese actor or a Hong Kong actor or actress act in a mainland Chinese production, they will not be speaking Mandarin. So you can't really have them use their real voice for that. So most dramas were actually dubbed, or period dramas were dubbed. When that happened, it was fine because those were professionals. What ended up happening is everybody would get like voice fatigue, whereas basically the same like 10 actors
Yeah.
who would dub the same folks. And then you're like, well, you know, I'm enjoying what I'm seeing on screen, but my ears are just still with another drama. But right now, so there's actually been a really big push in the past, you know, 4 or 5 years for even historical dramas to be not dubbed. And that has been good and bad in several ways. It's been good because then it really showcases when an actor and actress is very, very good with their own, you know, acting abilities. But it also has shown that for some people, it's shown that they're not good actors or actresses because they don't have the dub to like sub in for them. And that if, for example, you're as an actor, your voice skills or just like basic acting skills without a dub is not up to par, it really drags you out of the experience. And what might have been like a 7.5 rating drama really drops it down to like a 6 or 6.5 simply because that one actor cannot, his voice is just like not fit, or he can't act. Let's put it that way. So it's good and bad. I do like when we get more of the actors' real voices, because then there's, you know, that this is his or her voice instead of a dub. But then other times I'm like, oh, I just like you as a pretty face. With the voice. So let's please continue to dub you.
It's quite funny because I feel like your voice is also part of your acting. If you can't line deliver, then it brings you out of that character. And one that I use as an example, because a lot of people will be like, oh, why have we got, and I've had this question from international fans, and I'm like, well, first of all, as an international fan, if we don't speak Mandarin, we won't be able to pick up on those like different tones or different accents, or just whole different dialects. So to us it makes no difference, but to somebody who is listening and is watching in Chinese, it'll make all the difference, because they will pick up on all of that, and it can bring that person out of the drama. And I've also said a lot of the time that Chinese dramas, unlike, I compare it to Korean dramas because that's, something. Korean dramas have now started to shift and be made for international audiences with all of like this money pouring in. But like Chinese dramas, they're still very much made for Chinese people in China. So, they're not going to be, what's the word I'm looking for? They're not going to be looking to cater as much to international audiences. But just like what you were saying with the dubbing, for example, last year, Fairy and Devil, very simple one. There is no way that Wang Hedi could, have the voice of, a 3,000-year-old demon. You just wouldn't be able to buy that character. So in that aspect, like I can get, behind that. I think it was, I don't know if you guys watched it, I think, is it called The Autumn Ballad? I think it was either from last year or the year before. It is a historical drama, but I think
I watched that one.
Yeah, were they the ones that they did a lot of the dubbing on set? Was it that they recorded a lot of the audio on set and then they got backlash for it or something?
Yeah, so I don't know if it was that one, but Qiao Xin, the main female lead, definitely used her own voice. I don't think the main male lead did, Xu Zhengxi, but certainly like Qiao Xin, the female lead, is someone who is generally praised more for her modern day dramas rather than her historical day dramas. So that certainly is kind of like, for your final output, going back to what you said about Dylan Wang Hedi, apparently his true voice acting or line delivery is nowhere near as good as what the dubbing gentleman did for him. And so people have actually questioned whether or not he can make it to superstardom status if he is going to rely his entire life on a voice dub. And this was a question for Alan Rin Jialun, where he used his real voice in 1,000 Years for You, and he was panned for it.
I bet it is quite like a fine line to walk. I feel like, it is something that, just like with acting, you can work on it. You can work on like line delivery. So if the actor or the actress is willing to put that in, I feel like, their whole performance will just be elevated, and it'll be able to take them from somebody who's good to like somebody who's really, really good. So I'm hoping that, the new, lot of actors and actresses coming up are like behind that push and are learning to like use their voices a bit more. So that was a whole aside, but it was really interesting to get like your guys' perspective on it, because like I said, as an international viewer, I've started to pick up like when it's different dialects or words are said slightly different. But for you guys, you will be able to pick up that straight away. So it'll bring you way out of a drama way more, especially if it's something like a historical drama that is meant to sound a certain way, and then like it doesn't. I bet it just brings the whole drama down in a sense.
I will just put the last point on this is the best comparison is for modern day dramas. A lot of these dramas are using their real voice because, you know, as you said, it's not, you don't need as much practice. So I would say compare it to if you were requested to act in a Shakespeare play, you need to really have your line delivery set and ready to go, versus if you just had a modern play, maybe you can use the same kind of enunciation as we're doing right now. But for a Shakespeare play, you really need to work on it. And that would be the same for like a historical drama.
That's a really good comparison, actually, because I think a lot of people will be able to pick from that comparison. They'll be able to understand it a little bit more. So, yeah, next question up is, do you guys have any tips for viewers who want to get into Chinese historical dramas?
Yeah, so I mean, I would say just pick any drama and go for it, because as you've mentioned, like our taste in Chinese dramas might be a little bit different from an international viewer. You know, if you're looking for pure, fun, historical Chinese dramas where the setting isn't fully based off of a time period and you're just looking for a fun drama, that's perfectly fine. If you're looking to learn more history, you'll want to just be aware of what drama you're picking. Like, for example, we talked about Joy of Life or Nirvana and Fire. Those are great options if you're just trying to get into something and like very high quality. Meanwhile, if you're watching the story of Minglan or Ruyi's Life in the Palace or Empresses in the Palace, those are set in actual periods of history for you to check in on. I think the most important thing to watch for when you're watching historical Chinese dramas is to recognize that these dramas take significant creative licenses on their subjects. So it is important to take everything that you watch with a grain of salt. And I always try to do my own research after watching a show, just so that I can check myself on what's actually going on in history. You can really enjoy what's being portrayed on screen, but that shouldn't be the end all be all. And I think that's a really great way to make you more interested in Chinese history.
Yeah, I feel like that's a really good thing, because I feel like if you were to take, and that's with any drama, if you were just to take the drama at face value and nothing else, you could be missing so much, context and so much of, the surroundings of it, that, you end up not understanding it quite as much. So yeah, actually, I have found that the one thing that I really enjoyed, so one of my favorite historical dramas, I don't know if you guys have watched it, it's called The Sword and the Brocade. It stars Tan Sang Yoon and, oh, I always forget his name. But yeah, that was one. Yeah, the one that why I love that drama so much, it was the fact that it was like based on like in-house politics, if that makes sense. And that was something that I hadn't watched, before. And I was loving the story more for that than for anything else. Like, I just wanted to know how all of these concubines were, going to get along and how everything was going to get sorted. And I feel like going in and not knowing anything about it was pretty interesting, because I was like, I haven't watched anything like this before, and now I'm intrigued. But yeah, I feel like anyone going into any drama, you're gonna want it, like we were saying earlier, if it makes you curious enough to go and look it up, then it's done its job quite right.
And I'm just going to do a plug here, is
go
on our
go
website,
for it. Go.
For chasingdramas.com, we have been putting up pretty in-depth reviews for dramas of all sorts, whether it is historical or even some modern and fantasy. And so if there's something that you're kind of like, I don't know where to start, feel free to check out our website for all the drama reviews that we have put up, or just reach out to us, because, we can certainly give you some ideas.
Yeah, guide you in the right direction. So, and we were just talking about this, but what are some recommendations you would give to beginner watchers?
So if we're focusing mainly on historical dramas, I would say first, take a look just in general, probably, of if it's you want to do historical based on Chinese history, take a look at maybe like a period or time period that you want to get interested in, whether that's the Qing dynasty, Ming dynasty, Song dynasty. I can go on and on. But if there's like a time period that you're interested in, then start with that, then focus on, hey, maybe there's a certain subject that I'm interested in, whether that is palace intrigue, whether that is a war drama, or for example, let's say if I'm very interested in here for me, if I'm very interested in, let's say, Game of Thrones from a Western drama perspective, then maybe Three Kingdoms is going to be the type of drama for you where it's all about politicking. It's all about shifting alliances. Like those are some areas that I would say, what is your interest? What do you want to learn more about? And then, take a look at what you have reviewed, for example, Liliana, and then, just take a look at what others have recommended and just get started. If it's not your cup of tea, maybe follow what a certain actor and actress has done if you like that person in that specific drama, and then go along with that vein of thought as well. I feel like that has done me quite well as I'm picking and choosing which dramas I want to watch.
I feel like actually that is when people ask me for recommendations, that is how I like to recommend. I ask them, what do you already enjoy? Whether that be, in your Western shows, whether that be any other Asian shows that you watch, what is it that you already enjoy? Because I feel like then you can recommend something that is, similar or that already grabs them in a certain way. So that's always, a good way to sort of recommend dramas, I think. And so, for my very last question, what are your top 3 Chinese dramas? And this doesn't have to be historical, just like, top 3. And for me, I feel like I wrote that question down, and I feel like that's just a hard question to answer in general. But, hopefully you guys have some answers for that.
Sure. I'll go first. The first one, for me, the 3 have to be Pearl Princess or 还珠格格, because that really was such a blockbuster hit growing up and really sparked our interest in these dramas and Chinese in general. It would also be Empresses in the Palace or 甄嬛传, and also lastly, it would be 琅琊榜 or Nirvana in Fire. I think those are pretty standard classics that a lot of people really enjoy.
Okay.
So for me, I will also add Pearl Princess in my list, but then the second one is actually Chinese Paladin. So that is a fantasy drama that came out in 2005 and is based off of a video game, but it's like considered one of the classics of the genre for Chinese fantasy. The soundtrack for that show is such a banger. I still listen to it sometimes as like a nostalgic kick. So highly recommend. And then for me, the Heaven Sword and Dragon Saber, or in Chinese, 倚天屠龙记. It is a wuxia drama that features Su Youpeng, Jia Jinwen, and Gao Yuanyuan. And this is the 2003 version of this drama. I just remember that one being the one wuxia drama that really got me into this genre itself. So if you're able to find that on YouTube, if there is a good subtitle, a subtitled version, I would highly recommend checking that one out.
So you didn't see my face. Listeners wouldn't have seen, but my face when you mentioned that drama. Like I said, I had somebody on, another guest from Hong Kong, and that was the drama she recommended. And I looked for the entire internet, and it just is not available. And I'm like, I keep seeing like people recommending it, and I keep thinking, I just want to watch it. And I
maybe
feel...
you have to get a DVDs now. You gotta go to your Chinatown and find the store that still stocks the DVD. Maybe or we can lend you our DVD set that we still have at home, and you can watch it if your computer has a DVD drive.
I actually, believe it or not, I actually have a DVD player still. So there we go. But yeah, I did find a version on YouTube, but I believe it's like a later version.
Yeah.
So, which I hear is not the best. Like, people keep referencing to the older version, but it's just nowhere to be found. I did look. She looked as well. Like, we were both looking, because I was like, just find it. Like, I want to watch this. but apparently it is not available anywhere. See, the curse of not knowing. Well, I'm sure it probably is available. It just probably hasn't got like subtitles or anything.
Yeah.
And I feel like this is a little curse of not being able to speak the language. See, it's just another encouragement for me to be like, I'm just going to sit down, and it'll be like a lifelong journey of learning Mandarin, I feel.
I think it'll be something like we did. You watch the TV show and you're like, see, I understand what they're saying because they have subtitles, like Chinese subtitles. And then you can say, okay, let me match it to the actual book and go from there.
I feel like, believe it or not, there's like a lot of phrases and words that I can pick out now, and I don't even have to read the subtitles because like I understand what they're saying. So yeah, you know, there's stuff that like you can pick up. It is a lot harder in historical dramas. Like I find it much easier in modern versions. But yeah, that is, like I said, the one drama that she also recommended for Wuxia. We were like, no, we can't find it. So yeah, that is all of my questions. Do you guys have anything else you would like to add at all?
No, I mean, this was so much fun. We had a blast. And thank you so much for inviting us on the show, you know, and being able to talk about Chinese dramas.
Oh, I always love like just talking. Well, my podcast is focused on that mainly anyways, but I always feel like I love when I have guests like you on because I get to learn so much more, you know, about certain areas that I don't know. And yeah, thank you so much to both of you for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure. And we will sign off now. Thank you.
Thank you.
This has been another episode of the Tea and Soju Asian Drama Podcast. I'm your host, Liliana, and you can come and chat to me on Instagram, Tea and Soju Pod, all one word, and on Twitter, tea_soju_pod. You can also email me at teandsojupodcast@gmail.com. If you would like to support this podcast, please consider joining Patreon for extra content. Lastly, if you enjoy this podcast, please help by rating and reviewing wherever you listen to help others find this drama corner. I'll leave everything linked in the description notes. See you next time for more Asian drama chatter.